So the pogroms, the violent expulsion of Jews from Central Europe by the Russian power, took place around 1860, 1870, and then they continued throughout the 19th century, the 20th century. But in addition to, as I said, Jewish men being literate, the other characteristic of that migration was that the entire society moved away. So you had all layers, from the milkman to the peasant to the little accountant to the shopkeeper, all the way up to the rabbi. So the entire structure of the society, with its entirely functioning society, moved in blocks, literally, from wherever they were living to the United States. And that allowed them to function and to resume their activities almost instantly. Reciprocal support, community, language community, and the ability to read and write, which made acquiring another language at a higher level very easy, and therefore in penetrating higher positions and higher professions. Then come the Italians around the 1880s. The Italians had none of those assets. They did not speak English, not only, but they did not even speak Italian. And that is one of the most misunderstood or harder to understand aspects of Italian culture. Italy, for the longest time, people of Italy had two languages. One is Italian, which is the formal language that is written and starts back from the 1300s. To this very day, an educated Italian can read texts written in the 1300s by Dante or people like that. This is not possible for British, French, Portuguese, German, whatever. So it's a very stable language, a literary language. And it was used as the so-called lingua franca, which is the common language that everybody uses when they come from different linguistic backgrounds. So English today is the lingua franca of the world. It's the lingua franca of business, it's the lingua franca of technology, or even tourism. You know, if you want to go anywhere and you know some English, you can be assured that you can get by with it, because locals will know some English. Now, that was Italian back then. The very low class, the peasants, the dispossessed, the poorest of the poor, did not know Italian. What did they speak? They spoke the local dialects. Now, dialect does not simply mean a different pronunciation or an intonation. When we say dialect in America, we talk about slight differences in pronunciation. For instance, Boston dialect versus Appalachian dialect, Nebraska versus Brooklyn dialect. But yet the language is identical. The grammatical rules are identical. Here we are talking about completely different languages. Sicilians speaking Sicilians are not understandable to anyone else. Yeah, fragments of the conversation, words here and there, but basically their language is local, and it is a fully developed language. Sicily is the island close to the end, to the boot of Italy. If you take Napolitans who speak their dialect do not understand Italian, period. That was in the past, obviously. Everybody now is educated and so forth. But talking about 150 years ago, people who had no education, not only did they lack the ability to communicate with the foreigners, they didn't even communicate among themselves. So from Naples to Sicily to Bari to northern Italy, they all had different dialects that made it impossible to create a community. Historically, they did not come from the same place. Southern Italy was dominated by the vice kingdom of Spain for the longest time. The north was dominated by Austrians, French, Spanish at the various periods, for long periods during the troubled history of Italy. So these people came, they were uneducated, illiterate, they did not have the simplest skills. They were peasants, they were just brute labor, brute force. And in addition to that, they couldn't even communicate among one another. So they didn't have any assets to sell. And they found themselves in this situation, in this society, and they filled the jobs that they could find. So the lowest possible jobs, and that's how they are represented. They're represented being shoeshine or hoodlums, criminals, loafers, or at best they find jobs in construction as cannon fodder, so replaceable parts. And in many cases, people who went south, they became replacement labor for the recently emancipated slaves. They were hired in these plantations, and they took over the jobs that legitimately African Americans abandoned as soon as they were emancipated and liberated.